If today feels mentally different, not heavier, not more emotional, but quieter and more aware, like your perspective itself is beginning to shift, this isn't random. Something is reorganizing internally. Not your circumstances yet, your perception. And perception changes everything before external reality does. You may notice today that certain situations look different now, not because they changed overnight, but because you're seeing them differently, with more distance, more objectivity, more awareness of what's actually happening beneath the surface. That's the shift. Pluto Retrograde continues working deeply now, but instead of emotional intensity, the transformation is becoming mental, psychological. You may feel less emotionally reactive today, but more observant, more reflective, more aware of patterns that were previously hidden by emotion. And that awareness can feel strangely quiet, not dramatic, not explosive, just clear. You may also notice that your tolerance is changing. Certain conversations feel exhausting faster. Certain distractions feel meaningless. Certain emotional dynamics no longer hold the same psychological power over you, because your internal priorities are reorganizing, not through force, through awareness. And awareness changes your relationship to everything around you. You may even find yourself pausing more today, thinking before reacting, observing before speaking, questioning old assumptions instead of automatically believing them. That's important, because transformation becomes real the moment your perspective changes consistently, not temporarily, consistently. And today, that consistency deepens. You may also feel a growing separation between who you used to be emotionally and who you're becoming mentally. Not disconnected from yourself, just evolving beyond certain automatic patterns. And that evolution begins quietly, long before external results appear. So if today feels calmer, more mentally clear, like your perspective is slowly reorganizing itself, it's because the Pluto retrograde process is moving deeper into your psychological awareness. What you're experiencing today is not just deeper thought, it's mental restructuring. There's a difference. Deeper thought still operates inside the same perspective. Mental restructuring changes the perspective itself. And that's what Pluto retrograde is beginning to do now. You may notice that certain beliefs feel weaker today. Certain assumptions feel questionable. Certain emotional narratives no longer feel completely true. Not because someone convinced you, but because your awareness expanded beyond them. And once awareness expands, old interpretations begin collapsing naturally. That's why today may feel mentally unusual. You're not just thinking differently, you're processing reality differently. You may also notice that your attention is becoming more selective, less interested in surface-level stimulation, less emotionally drawn into distractions, less willing to spend mental energy on things that no longer feel meaningful, because your mind is reorganizing around depth, not noise. Pluto retrograde does that slowly. It strips away unconscious mental habits, ways of thinking that once operated automatically, especially thoughts connected to fear, control, validation, or emotional survival patterns. And when those mental patterns weaken, clarity increases. Not instantly, gradually. You may also become more aware today of how much perception shapes emotion, how certain thoughts create emotional intensity, how certain interpretations fuel attachment, how repeating mental stories can quietly control your direction, That realization matters, because transformation begins accelerating the moment you recognize that not every thought deserves belief, and not every emotional reaction accurately reflects reality. You may even notice a stronger desire for mental honesty now. Not comforting explanations, real explanations. A clearer understanding of what's genuinely true beneath emotional distortion, because your awareness is becoming harder to manipulate. Not just by other people, by your own unconscious patterns too. And that's a major shift, especially psychologically, because once you begin questioning the internal narratives that once controlled your reactions, you stop living automatically. You begin choosing consciously. And conscious awareness changes your entire direction over time. So what you're experiencing today is not just introspection, it's your mental framework beginning to evolve. One of the most powerful shifts during transformation is realizing that your mind no longer reacts the way it used to. Not perfectly, not all at once, but enough to notice the difference. You may experience this today through subtle moments, catching yourself before spiraling emotionally, questioning an old fear instead of automatically believing it, pausing before reacting to something that once would have consumed your attention. That pause matters more than you realize, because awareness creates interruption, and interruption breaks unconscious cycles. For a long time, many emotional reactions operated automatically. A situation happened, a thought appeared, an emotional pattern activated immediately, without space, without observation, without questioning whether the reaction was still aligned with reality. But now, something different is happening. There's space, even if only briefly. Space between thought and belief, space between emotion and reaction, space between what happens and how deeply it controls you. That space is psychological freedom beginning. And once that freedom appears, your relationship with your own mind changes. You stop treating every thought like absolute truth. You stop assuming every emotional response requires immediate action. You begin observing yourself while you experience yourself. That's deeper awareness. And Pluto Retrograde intensifies that process, especially now, because this phase is not only exposing emotional patterns, it's exposing mental conditioning. Old narratives about your worth, old fears about rejection, old beliefs about control, safety, or identity. Things that quietly shaped your choices without fully entering conscious awareness before. And once those patterns become visible, they begin losing power. Not because you force them away, but because conscious awareness weakens unconscious control naturally. You may also notice that your inner dialogue feels different now, less emotionally chaotic, less impulsive, less controlled by immediate fear or attachment. Not completely calm yet, but clearer, more intentional, more aware of what deserves energy and what only drains it. That's why this phase matters, because transformation is no longer emotional alone. It's cognitive now. Your perception is changing, your internal processing is changing, and eventually your external life begins reflecting those psychological shifts too. So if your mind feels quieter today, more aware, less reactive than before, it's because your awareness is beginning to outgrow the patterns that once controlled it.
This is where today becomes important, because increased awareness can either create clarity or over-analysis. and the difference between those two matters more than most people realize. The first trap is overthinking every realization, trying to mentally dissect everything, searching for hidden meaning in every interaction, turning awareness into constant analysis. Because when your perception sharpens, your mind naturally wants to keep digging. But not every thought requires investigation. Not every observation requires interpretation. Sometimes awareness is enough on its own. The second trap is emotional detachment turning into cynicism, seeing patterns everywhere, distrusting too quickly, assuming every emotional situation has manipulation hidden beneath it. Because Pluto energy reveals depth, but without balance, depth can become suspicion, and suspicion slowly disconnects you from trust. Not just trust in others, trust in life itself. There's also a subtler pattern today, mistaking mental clarity for emotional superiority, feeling more aware than people around you, quietly judging others for emotional reactions you now recognize differently. But awareness is not meant to separate you from humanity. It's meant to deepen your understanding of it. Real psychological growth creates compassion, not arrogance. Because the more conscious you become, the more you realize how many unconscious patterns most people are carrying silently, including yourself. You may also notice a temptation to emotionally withdraw completely today, to stay only inside observation, only inside analysis, because observing feels safer than emotionally engaging sometimes. But healing does not happen through observation alone. It happens through conscious participation, living differently, responding differently, choosing differently. So the real calibration today is balanced awareness, seeing clearly without becoming emotionally disconnected, thinking deeply without becoming mentally trapped inside analysis. Because what makes this phase powerful is not how much you notice, it's how consciously you use what you notice.
So how do you move through this phase without getting trapped in overthinking and without disconnecting emotionally from life around you? You stay grounded in conscious observation, not endless analysis. Because today is not asking you to figure everything out. It's asking you to become more intentional with what you allow to shape your mind. Start by simplifying your attention. Not every thought deserves energy. Not every realization deserves obsession. Instead, focus on what consistently proves itself true, what repeats, what remains stable over time, what still feels aligned after emotional intensity fades. Because clarity becomes more accurate through consistency, not urgency. You may also find it helpful to reconnect with direct experience today. Not only thought, not only internal analysis, experience. Pay attention to how your body responds to environments, how your energy changes around certain people, how your nervous system reacts to specific conversations or situations. Because awareness is not only mental, it's physical too, and sometimes your body recognizes misalignment before your mind fully understands it. You can also practice slowing mental momentum, especially when you notice yourself spiraling into analysis. Pause,
Step back. Ask yourself, is this insight, or am I trying to mentally control uncertainty? That question matters, because many people overthink not to understand more, but to avoid discomfort. But discomfort is part of transformation. Not every uncertain feeling needs immediate resolution. Some things become clearer naturally when you stop forcing conclusions. You may also notice today that emotional simplicity feels more attractive now. Less drama, less emotional chaos, less psychological noise. That's not avoidance. That's your awareness becoming more refined. Your system is beginning to recognize how exhausting constant emotional turbulence really is. And once you recognize that, peace becomes more valuable than intensity. So today, protect your mental clarity, but stay connected to real life. Observe deeply, but remain emotionally human. Because transformation is not about escaping emotion. It's about relating to emotion consciously instead of reacting to it unconsciously.
Before you rush to define who you're becoming, pause here for a moment, because mental transformation needs time to stabilize. You may notice today that your awareness feels sharper, but your emotional certainty hasn't fully caught up yet. That's normal, because your perception is changing faster than your identity can immediately adjust to. And during phases like this, people often become impatient. They want final answers quickly, complete certainty quickly, a fully stabilized version of themselves immediately. But transformation rarely unfolds that cleanly, especially Pluto transformation. It happens in layers. First, awareness changes, then interpretation changes, then emotional responses begin changing, and eventually your choices start reflecting the new perspective consistently. That process takes time, not because you're failing, but because your nervous system is learning a new way of processing reality, a less reactive way, a more conscious way, a less emotionally automatic way. And sometimes that adjustment period feels unfamiliar. You may even feel emotionally between versions of yourself, no longer fully attached to old reactions, but not fully stabilized in the new awareness yet either. That in-between phase can feel mentally strange, quiet, detached, observant. Not because something is wrong, but because your internal framework is reorganizing itself. That's why emotional calm may feel unfamiliar right now, especially if your nervous system spent a long time adapting to stress, emotional unpredictability, or constant psychological stimulation. Peace initially feels different when chaos used to feel normal. But different does not mean wrong. Sometimes different means healing. You may also notice today that you need more mental space than usual, more silence, more stillness, more distance from unnecessary noise. Listen to that, because your awareness is refining itself, and refinement requires space, not constant stimulation, not constant emotional input. Space. So today, allow your perspective to settle naturally, not through force, not through over-analysis, but through steady observation and honest self-awareness. Because what's changing now is deeper than mood. It's the structure of how you interpret your reality. Let everything settle here, not to stop the transformation, but to recognize how deeply it's already moving through you. Because today was not about dramatic emotion,
It was about perception. And perception quietly reshapes your entire life over time. So, take a breath. Steady, controlled, unforced. And notice what feels mentally different now. Not necessarily around you, within you. Maybe it's the way you pause more before reacting. Maybe it's the way certain emotional patterns no longer feel automatic. Maybe it's simply the realization that you can no longer fully believe the old narratives that once controlled your thinking. That matters. Because awareness, once it becomes consistent, changes your direction permanently. Not through force, through understanding. And understanding changes behavior naturally. You stop emotionally feeding certain cycles. You stop mentally reinforcing certain fears. You stop attaching your identity to reactions that no longer represent who you are becoming. That's transformation. Not instant perfection, not emotional numbness, conscious evolution.
The kind that begins quietly inside your perception first, before the outer world fully reflects it. You may also realize today that mental peace is becoming more valuable to you now. Not because you care less about life, but because you're becoming more aware of how much unnecessary psychological noise you've carried for too long. And once awareness reveals that, your priorities change. Slowly, naturally, without needing dramatic declarations. Because real transformation doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it appears through smaller things. Clearer boundaries, slower reactions, healthier emotional distance, more intentional thinking. And over time, those small internal shifts completely change your external direction. So as you move forward from here, stay close to what feels mentally honest, not emotionally addictive, not psychologically chaotic, mentally honest. What consistently brings clarity? What repeatedly creates confusion? What leaves your mind feeling stable instead of emotionally overloaded? Let those answers guide you, quietly, consistently, without forcing certainty too quickly. Because what's happening now is your awareness becoming strong enough to reshape your reality from the inside out. And if this helped you understand yourself even slightly, return to it, not to overanalyze your transformation, but to continue living it more consciously.